I'm honored to be able to introduce our speakers tonight. So the title of our program is Choices You Can Make to Help Save Our Planet. Floods, fires, sea level rise. You could say that we on the coast are on the front lines of climate change. April 22nd, 1970 was the first Earth Day and beginning of the modern environmental movement. What can an individual or small group do to help keep this planet livable for ourselves, our communities, and our fellow living creatures? Janet Cox, CEO of Climate Action California, and Mohan Iver, a partner of IndieBio, a global venture firm, bring extensive knowledge and activism to this existential question. Janet Cox is the CEO of Climate Action California, a nonprofit dedicated to the climate crisis that lobbies in Sacramento and the California congressional delegation. With degrees from Stanford University and the London School of Economics and Political Science, Janet has also run her own consulting firm, providing services to San Francisco Bay Area cities concerned with water pollution and watershed management. Mohan Iver, general partner of IndieBio, a part of SOSV, a global venture firm investing in entrepreneurs making positive environmental change in the world, was educated at University of Tennessee, Duke University, and Yale School of Management. Previous to working at IndieBio, Mohan worked as Chief Operations Officer for Pendulum Therapeutics. And Janet and Mohan are good friends of mine. We know each other because we all belong to a church in Palo Alto, First Presbyterian Church in Palo Alto, which has long had a special interest group in climate and had a group called Co-Planet that's been working on issues regarding sustainability for decades now. So I'm gonna ask Janet and Mohan to come up and we'll hear from their extensive knowledge on this topic. And I'm gonna ask Janet Janet, why don't you give me the postcards and I'll pass them out, because she would like to talk about Climate Action California and how she started this group. And Mohan and Janet will have an interesting discussion. So this is already on, and you can turn on one.
Cynthia, do you want me to?
Well, thank you, Cynthia. Thank you,
Yeah,
Cynthia.
thank you.
Do we have another mic?
Yeah, one of those mics should be live.
No, can't go.
Okay,
Check it.
yeah,
We'll figure it out.
okay.
I bet it comes
You
out.
want to take it out?
Yeah, it's really nice to be here.
It's dead.
Yeah, you did. We can keep passing this back and forth.
Hello? Hello?
Try this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's working.
This one?
Yeah. Great to be here, and thank you for welcoming, I suppose, all people to the AAW. I was like, wow. But it's, yeah, exactly. Yeah. But thank you, Cynthia, for having us.
So we thought we would just sort of talk to each other and ask each other questions. And after we've done that for a while.
She said it'd be tough, too.
So I'll start. So Mohan, tell us what you do and why you do it and how you got there in 25 minutes or less.
Sure. So I'm a general partner at a firm called SOSV, SOS as in Save the Planet Ventures. So we do, as a global firm, we invest in human health and what we call planetary health. So that's the domains in which we do it. And that's a broad remit. So I'm a biochemical engineer by training, and I worked at mostly biotech and pharma and medical device tech startups. 6 or 7 startups later, I started to think about what I wanted to do in life. I also have a couple of kids who challenged me on, as I think is happening with the world, young people have gotten it, whereas we are still trying to get it. And so they challenged me about a lot of things at the dinner table, but one of the things that stuck with me is really, what am I doing with what little talent I have to bring change in this key area. And I began to realize that it is really an existential threat of our time. And I need to do something. And so, especially during the pandemic, I had some, like all of us, kind of times to think about my life and what I really wanted to do. And so I moved over, well, all my companies were venture backed. So I didn't know the world of venture capital. And so now I'm on the other side, funding startups, but with the difference being new innovations that can come to change, make an impact. If the key thing that I realized is that if the scaled innovations of today can help us make it, then I don't need to exist. But I realized that's not true. If the whole world is electrified, it just wouldn't get us there to where we need to be. And it would have other problems as well. So the role of innovation in solving climate change is a key reason. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing the rest of my life. But that leads me to you. So what is Climate Action California? And how did you get to start that?
Whatever it is, I think I should be asking you for money.
Indeed. The donate now button, I do know her webpage.
Right.
The donate now button is at the bottom of the webpage.
Very, very prominent. So Climate Action California is a statewide organization that we started actually about a year and a half ago. We kind of grew out of something called 350 Silicon Valley that had morphed into a statewide thing. And we started with the 501c4, and then a little less than a year ago, we got a 501c3. We lobby and advocate for strong climate policy primarily in Sacramento, but our teams, which are listed on the cards that you have, are really vertically integrated from local on up to federal or global policy. We're unusual in that we're really volunteer driven. A lot of environmental organizations raise money to pay staff to do the work. We have the most amazing, wonderful, dedicated volunteers I've ever worked with in my life. And we raise money to pay staff to support the volunteers who do the work. And the idea is to really empower everybody to do something and make a difference and have wonderful people to do it with. And it actually seems to work. These fabulous people show up and stick.
I just had this question come up as in the context of this very interesting organization. What percentage are women and girls who are empowered to do this work?
Well, the president of our 501c3 board is a high school senior.
She knows Robert's Rules of Order? What?
She knows a lot. She's really something.
Right.
No, it's a really mixed, all ages group, and everybody seems to get along and help each other out, and pretty cool.
Janet and I just had dinner with Barbara and Cynthia, and we'll give you the punchline. We all have to work together. Every one of us, young, old, men, women, every single person has to be in this fight. That's the bottom line. We'll show you why that is clearly the case. Some of you believe this, but may not believe exactly how to plug in, but that is clearly the bottom line. Amazing that you're able to do this empowering type of model.
Well, I think the other point is that at this time, it's so late in the day that, buying an EV, swapping your light bulbs, putting solar panels on your roof is all good, but it's not gonna change, it's not gonna solve the problem. So we believe that policy is gonna make the difference. And Climate Action California focuses, we we try to focus, let me tell you, this is a big, wide field. So we try to focus on short-lived climate pollutants, which are principally methane, refrigerants, and black carbon or soot. Because if we can reduce those substances, those emissions that have an outsized effect in the short and medium term, if we can cut those now, we can buy time to reduce carbon overall in the longer term. So short-lived pollutants, transportation, which is the biggest source of California's emissions, and measures that are going to move the transition to a low carbon economy quicker. So that's where we try to, there's still a bajillion issues and bills that we feel like we have to follow, but we do try to stick to those 3 lanes.
Maybe let's double click on the times past for small changes for a second. And I think one of the things I find is that we all have a climate journey, and I think we're all going to have our climate journeys. And we all come at it from different points. So at least to equilibrate us, I thought it'd be good to get a sort of a big picture of what we mean by that, Janet. So, for a variety of reasons, it certainly makes sense. The UN is the arbiter of what we would call where we are today in terms of carbon emissions and how that relates to the air temperature. It's kind of a simple model, but it's not. I'll show you some of the reasons why it's not working. But anyway, current UN things would say 1.5 degree rise is really, really bad. 1.5 degree rise. And we are there already, right? So we can talk about it at these conference of parties, we can talk about it in the nations, we talk about it in national, every government is talking about it. But it's really, it's just past the time. If you want some history on this, probably about 2 decades ago, people predicted that a 6% rise would be incredibly bad. And about 2 decades ago, they said, no, 4% is incredibly bad. And now it's down to 2%. So we're at 1.5, and 2% is supposed to be really crazy. Now, the interesting thing is these are models, and models don't capture the complexity of the world that we live in. So for example, 8 times the current carbon is trapped in the tundra. It's trapped under the ice. If the ice completely melts, the models break, and so does our world, right? The Amazon is itself the lungs of the earth. And if that goes, the models break. So the model is a model, and it shows that this is, if we can make it work, there may be a way out of here. But what I think Janet's saying, and I just wanted to give you the bigger picture, and sort of carbon, and it's just too late. We've already at the place where we're going to have severe issues. Now, the other thing that Janet and I and Cynthia really talk about a lot is that the burden of this is going to fall to the most vulnerable on Earth. Maybe.
Absolutely, and it already is. We here in the San Francisco Bay Area, this is like, we're in climate heaven. And it's because of the ocean and the San Francisco Bay and the whole, I think California, the coastal California, the west coast of Peru and the west coast of Portugal are the only places in the world that have this amazing kind of, we're just surviving better than a lot of other people are, which is kind of a heavy responsibility, because we better get to work saving it for the rest of the people. Well, we're well enough and functional enough to do that. It's just, but I refuse to get discouraged. I simply, we talk about how the world is going to be horrible for future generations. They're going to love whatever they have. I'm sure, California in 1935 was a fabulously beautiful productive, abundant place. And I'm never gonna see that, but I love what's here now. And our kids and grandkids are gonna love what they've got. And they're gonna be struggling to save it. And it's our job to make it possible for them to do that. So, I don't know, it's a scary time in some ways, but it's also hopeful, because sometimes we win things. Sometimes we really make big chunks of progress. And, you know, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Act that Biden passed just make a gigantic difference. And some of the California policies, you know, California, I feel really fortunate to be doing this work in California, because it matters. We're big enough to make a difference, and the rest of the world is watching. And so it's always a struggle, but boy, when we win one, it resonates. And we just have to keep at it.
Yeah.
But I want to ask Mohan, who has been watching the cops, I want to know how you feel coming out of the cops. Do you get the sense that the international community is actually gonna get a grip on this, or do you think that it's up to the rest of us to propel those governments, or what do you see as the
just
utility of the Congress of the parties?
Just to set the stage, COP's COP, they happen every year. They've been happening since Rio de Janeiro. So COP 26 was in Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt. COP 27. COP 28 was in Dubai. So that's, we have to keep track of this stuff and go there. But I would say the general thing, there's a lot of things that happen at these places. But one of the things that I think gives me hope that the world is changing a lot is that one other comment about climate. The carbon emissions today are a reflection of the past history of the Earth. So in some ways, there's a lag time between the people who caused the problem and the people who are experiencing the fallout of the problem, right? So in so many ways, what we have in these COPs is a big tension between the industrialized countries, particularly the United States. Just to give you a couple of, I guess, factoids or whatever you want to call it. The world emits today 42 billion, approximately, give or take, 42 billion tons of carbon dioxide. The US produces 11% of that, and Europe produces 7% of that. And the US says, I've reduced it by 1%. So in any case, you get the sense of the problem. We got it here, we got it in California. We'll talk a little bit about Janet's, some of the things where we have to go further. But a whole new middle class of 200, 300 million people are forming in India. Another 300 million people of the middle class are in China. If we think about the middle class and how it shaped the United States, how the middle class is really responsible for the majority of purchases of goods and services, and therefore the emissions of carbon, buildings, houses, clothing, everything, food. I mean, the middle class just buys a lot of stuff.
And they all need air conditioning.
And they all need air conditioning. We all wanted this. We grew up in this area. I grew up in India, but I also was a middle class here. So imagine now, call it 2 more Americas just getting born. They want the same thing. They want the same cars. They want the same clothes. They want the same steak. They want the same everything. They don't want anything less. And if they got what they want, which, by the way, there's no reason why they shouldn't get what they want. If they just got it the same way with fossil fuels, with dairy farms as they operate today, with agriculture as it's done today, with buildings as they exist today, with all these things that exist today, they got what they wanted, the planet would be gone. The tundra would be melted, the models would be gone. That's simple as that. So the question, the tension then is, here are these countries trying to give them incentives to change, but they're the countries that caused the problem in the first place. So there's a lot of these cops are real wrestling with that. And in the middle of that, that's the main stage. But I think the key thing that where I spend a lot of time is at the periphery of the cops. There are people like Janet, there's people like me, there's people like other people, but there are lots of young people. Like I said, young people have gotten it, and they are activistic. They're keeping the politicians on their feet on the fire to figure this out. So I think the quick answer to your question, the only reason that things happen on the main stage, I believe, is because of the protests outside. And I believe that each country is having the same dynamic. And I believe with young people leading the way, I think we can get there. But I think every one of us has to sort of demand this to happen. And until then, it won't happen. And the second thing that needs to happen then, well, in my particular peculiar case here in this meeting, it's a very weird angle, is that there has to be goods and services that are totally green, that are attractive to people to buy. So I need to, get you clothes, polyester pants that were not made from petroleum. I have to get you cement that sequesters carbon rather than releasing carbon from the limestone. I gotta get energy that's renewable. So all of this stuff is all innovation that then drives that, I actually drove a Tesla here, and one of the things I realized about it is I like driving the car. It's actually a good car, it's got great pickup. And so that's the idea. Are there goods and services that are just so good, but yet totally green, that we will just want? And if we want that, the money will flow. And that's how I think about it, but that's just a narrow way of thinking about it. But let's go to the other side. Policy is the milieu in which business like us works. What kind of policies are you thinking about? What are the latest things that you're thinking about in California?
Well, I've got two favorites. Well, two. I'll name two favorites at the moment. There is a state assembly member from Culver City called Isaac Bryan, who is the most charming and articulate, amazingly, I love listening to this guy. He's 32 years old. He is something else, and he has introduced a constitutional amendment bill, which means, and so when the legislature can put a constitutional amendment on the ballot if it passes both houses of the legislature with 2/3. And so he's just started this. It's made it through its first committee. I'm gonna paraphrase it slightly, but the amendment pretty much says all Californians have the right to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment. It's awesome, because if we can get this into the Constitution, it will guide policy and enable the kind of litigation that we need all the time, and I frankly think litigation is gonna save us. It's so neat, and it's so simple, and it's gonna be so impactful if we can pass it.
That's amazing. Yeah. But there's an interesting link with human health there. So it's not. I think sometimes we think about climate as this other thing, but the human health piece of it is quite intricate to how the habitat that we live in.
Well, I think that all significant climate legislation is environmental justice legislation. And in California, environmental justice is all about health. I mean, we are just, the city of Los Angeles is a big conurbation plunked down on top of an oil field. And we have done terrible things to California, and we're suffering. The Central Valley has the worst air pollution in the country, and part of it is from abandoned oil wells that are leaking methane and
Oh, methane, the word methane has been uttered.
Oh, methane, yes, let's talk about methane. And this huge dairy farms that are just polluting the air and the water like you wouldn't believe. So Yeah, it's environmental justice and human health is really the point of many of these things.
Cynthia did tell me wherever possible to sort of level set and make sure that everybody's sort of following some of this stuff, because it can get kind of overwhelming. That we have to be positive and we have to change, we have to seek change. But some, the things that hold us back are despair, feeling like one person cannot do much, and certainly a whole bunch of overwhelming stuff.
And the lack of campaign finance
Yeah.
reform.
Oh, that too. Well, one kind of handle on it is something called the social cost of carbon. Some of you might have heard it. The Trump administration accounted for it as at $1 per billion tons. So that's, in other words, I told you there are 42 billion tons. The social cost of 42 billion tons of carbon emitted in the world today, and the Trump administration priced that carbon, the social cost of it, at $1, so $42 billion.
And Obama had it at, like.
95, 85.
No, it was 58, and that
58.
is now, and with inflation, it's now,
185.
no, it's like 68 or
Oh.
70 something. But the Biden administration is reviewing the social cost of carbon, and it looks like it needs to come out at around about 195 minimum. And Europe is also, I mean, this is really an important metric.
Right.
And I don't know what it's gonna take to get any kind of consensus, but it's gonna have to be a whole lot higher than it is now. But it is notable that Trump brought it down to insignificant.
So 195 is where I was going to go, which Biden just released. This is the second Biden
Yeah.
number.
Right.
And it's, I just did the math, it's $7 trillion. So we are spending $7 trillion about this carbon. So we can talk about taking carbon out, but really there's costs of healthcare, there's all kinds of collateral costs built into the system. That is the thing that we need to sort of think about. So people say, well, what are the money to do this? Well, we are spending $7 billion.
Controlling it is cheaper
Trillion.
than continuing.
Yes.
Right.
What's another bill that we should all participate in?
So there's another bill that Senator Caroline Menjivar has introduced that is sort of described as a superfund for climate change. And what that bill does is it looks at the documented emissions in the period from 2000 to 2020, and it allocates them proportionally to the emitters, and there are like 70 companies that are responsible for most of the emissions in that period. And it requires those companies to pay into a fund that will support the kinds of mitigations against climate harms that municipalities and all sorts of entities need to do. I mean, if you look at the damage from climate change, government's never gonna have the money to pay to fix it. The only entities on the planet that are rich enough to deal with the problem happen to be the people that polluted in the first place. So this is like a major polluters pay bill. And it's, these are just gigantic projects, getting these things passed. And there are whole coalitions of groups, including Climate Action California and a lot of the people in our coalition, that are just working on these bills every day. But these, brilliant young legislators, Menjivar is also in her first term, as is Isaac Bryan. They show up in the legislature and they put out these great bills, and it's just awesome. If we can just get them past oil and gas, the Chamber of Commerce, and the dairy lobby, which are the biggest problems we've got.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's about 15 minutes into this, we must have at least one thing we disagree on, have a controversy that make things very entertaining. So actually, let me go to this point. So I remember GM, I don't know if you guys all remember, GM sued California because California had too tight a regulation on the EPA mileage, right? Remember that? Same GM today, 100% EV commitments. So if you want to see signs of hope of behemoths, big companies who can make change, that's an example for me. So what do you think about divesting from all fossil fuel companies? What does that mean to you?
Well, here's how I got into this biz. So I got laid off from my job in about 2014. And for the previous 9 years, I'd been working for the Association of Bay Area Governments. And before that, I'd been a consultant for a long time, but for some reason, I got a real job. And for some reason, I had a real job long enough to qualify myself for a kind of medium, smallish CalPERS pension. And so the first Monday morning that I was unemployed, I sat there and tried to figure out what to do. And I decided two things. I would get a dog and I would try to get CalPERS to divest from fossil fuels. One of those was a lot easier than the other. And I worked on divestment for a pretty long time. And I decided that CalPERS is either stupid or corrupt. And I don't really think that that's stupid. So, I was, a lot of my early legislative experience was working on divestment bills, and I thought up a bill that required CalPERS and CalSTRS to disclose their climate-related financial risk, and it passed and was signed by Jerry Brown. And, but I couldn't stick with divestment because there was just too much other stuff to do. And divestment was really hard because CalPERS is intransigent. So there's now another divestment bill that a very dedicated bunch of people have been promoting for the last 2 or 3 years. I'm not sure it's going to even get a hearing this year in the legislature. It's just because CalPERS kind of owns the legislature in a lot of ways. And my feeling about it is that if that divestment bill was not limited to CalPERS and CalSTRS, the two public pension funds that are huge in California, if we had a bill that said all public funds in the state of California must get out of fossil fuels right now, I would work on it. Because I think that would be a bigger deal. But, I'm not convinced at this point that this is a terrible thing for people to hear me saying, but I don't think divestment at this point is going to change the world. I think we have to do more substantive stuff, and we better do it quick. Divestment would be great. There was going to be a bill. Actually, we suggested it, and the author took us up on it, and then decided it shouldn't be a bill. It should be a budget request. The idea was to cut the subsidies in the California budget for oil and gas. And that's a great idea. And especially, I don't care how bad the bill is. I want the headline that says, in a terrible budget year, California cuts subsidies to oil and gas. That's the kind of thing that I think would make a much bigger difference than simply divestment. So watch for that. We're trying to turn it into a budget request because the author figured he couldn't get it through the Revenue and Taxation Committee, which is kind of right. But yeah, that's a great idea. And that would be a wonderful message to the fossil fuel companies and everybody else.
Yeah, so I'll let you in on some machinations about venture capital funds and investment committees and how we think about things, thesis. So you're all from Silicon Valley, you've heard this whole disruption thing. So one facet of thinking is, how can I back a startup, somebody that'll shake up the world and take away the big guys of the world? And that's a great win for a venture capital firm. So the other, yeah, exactly. The other though, which is interesting, and this is why I bring up the GM model, is that if one of our companies is so innovative that they get bought by a large company, that then allows an oil and gas company to actually be green, faster, cheaper, better. So then we win too. So you see that, and you can start to see now, and there's actually some very interesting financial, for some of your financial stuff, you get what I'm trying to talk about here. When we think of utilities, we think of oil and gas, they're really largely, in the Wall Street terminology, seen as cyclical businesses. But the interesting thing that's happening with the greening of the economy is that they're becoming less cyclical. They actually are having businesses that are beyond cycles. And in fact, they may be, in fact, into a booming economy if they actually fell in line to think about it. And if you think of renewables as part of a large part of their business, and you can see actually, I did have a stat, 88% of the electrical grid is renewable in America. So that's like that.
In America.
In U.S., sorry, U.S.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but it's sort of, but that's a climbing percentage of how much of the EV electricals are going. And people are getting, well, let's just say their stock's getting higher because of this. So there's other way of thinking about it is, how can people win? How can the guys that can move, distribute goods, have the grids of the world, have money to change a lot of things in a single way? But how can they stop being dinosaurs and start being sort of tigers in the movement? Is another way to think about it. I know these are controversial, but I wanted to raise some controversy.
Well, California passed a really pretty fabulous clean trucks rule last year that is gonna try to transition the heavy trucking fleet to zero emissions. Unfortunately, the policy that CARB, the Air Resources Board, finally passed, they set the size of fleets that are required to electrify at 50, and we were arguing for 5. But we really are looking for a transportation revolution in California, because goods and, we just move a tremendous amount of stuff. And that's, the need to do that is not gonna go away, so. But that's one thing, but then I think government is gonna have to subsidize the purchase of a lot of those trucks for smaller entities that want to electrify in that way.
Or you can get into direct air capture or other things. Yeah, so just to make sure that.
Talk about direct air capture.
Yeah, so let's think through, let's give you some more context. So this is 42 billion tons of carbon, yeah. And people talk about something called net zero. Have you heard of net zero? Yes. Well, after some conversations, usually over wine, I realized that some of the folks didn't get the word net in that net zero. So when people talk about net zero, what they're saying, just to level set again, is that by 2050, we believe, based on decarbonization, we can bring the emissions down from, 42 is going to rise to 50 or 55, and then we can, before it peaks. And then for 55, we can come down to maybe 40, maybe 40, 45, something like that. So that's a huge, 55 all the way to 25. So there's a huge drop that we need to do. Almost half of our emissions need to go by. But there's still now another 10 to 15 to 20 billion tons of carbon dioxide that we need to somehow figure out. And this part is really about capturing the carbon from the air and sequestering it. And you can either do it carbon capture utilization, called short form CCUS, carbon capture and storage, or direct air capture, or various DAC. So those are the other things. When we talk about trucks, I was thinking about direct air capture. Talk about buildings, we can talk about direct air capture. Talk about any place where there's a concentrated, either carbon dioxide equivalents or methane or other NOx or other sorts of things that come out. So that's the other piece of this net thing. When we're at zero, people are polluting a lot. So that means we're still polluting a lot. It's not zero. It's just that somehow we've balanced it back out so that whatever we're at a baseline. We're not adding to the carbon in the world. That's the other way to think about it.
You're subtracting as much as you're adding.
Exactly. That's a net zero polluter, but I think in the world, we're not at zero carbon emissions. We're just at net zero.
So what is the likelihood that something like low carbon or carbon sequestering cement is actually going to take hold and take over the market because it better hurry?
So I'll give you an example of a company we have. It's a very interesting, exciting woman, PhD from Colorado, I think it is. Anyway, she found these organisms that are in the middle of the sea somewhere. As some of you may be biologists, they're called coccolithophores. They essentially take carbon and turn it into limestone, which is a key source of shellfish and various other things. So these coccolithophores lie in a particular strata in the ocean. This is a natural phenomenon. So she was able to take a coccolithophore organism and grow it in the lab. And suddenly now she's scaled it up where she can make limestone in the lab. Limestone, if you didn't have it in the lab, you'd be sitting innocently, trapping carbon, sitting out in the wild. Human beings take limestone, mine it, break it, take the carbon out, and make it into cement, which is called clinker cement in what's called Portland cement. So imagine now that if you can go to a cement manufacturer and have a drop-in replacement for a limestone that's made in the lab. So then you don't, obviously that's about 8% of carbon emissions. So that, it starts to count up after that. So it's an idea of an innovation that's sort of medium scale.
Yes, what's the likelihood that we can actually get something like that working at scale?
Yeah, so that's this. So now I come to this issue. Like if I divest from the cement guys and they're no longer in business, they won't help my company scale. So yeah, you're right. This is just one of the many innovations, but it's a struggle. But there are also other ways to get there. I believe we will have at least carbon neutral cement within 10 years. And so for example, this company already has contracts from all the data centers. The people who've gotten it are the IT people, weirdly enough. They're not so all the IT people, when they do a new data center, need sort of cement, something like this exactly. I think he might know, he handles buildings for Stanford, or decarbonization of buildings at Stanford, which is a big job. So in any case, but the idea would be, if all the new data centers that are going in there are carbon sequestered, carbon neutral and sequestered, that'd be carbon negative. That's what Microsoft wants to do, that's what Google wants to do. So there's a rising demand for creating a building, and Stanford's trying to do that too. So basically, it's a way to sort of say we have to do that. It's part of the deal.
And there's a bill in the legislature right now which is supposed to enable Caltrans to contract in the future with low carbon cement. In other words, to start building the demand now for something that isn't quite ready yet. And it's pretty forward looking.
We would be remiss if we didn't talk about agriculture. Methane will come up again. Do you have any bills in agriculture? Here there's some good agriculture in Half Moon Bay. I get some good stuff. Are there dairy farms here? Not much.
No, dairies are really a problem.
Yeah.
Agricultural methane is a huge,
Runoffs.
big deal.
Yeah.
Well, manure and burping cows are about. So,
Right.
But let's talk about methane.
Yes.
Tell us about the global methane, what is it called? It's
Agreement.
agreement.
Pledge. Yeah, so that was a key part of the last COP, is that there was a global methane agreement. So methane, again, just to level set, people measure carbon or carbon dioxide in molecules of carbon dioxide, obviously, but they think of it as equivalents of carbon dioxide, right? So when I say 42 tons, I don't mean 42 billion tons, sorry. I don't mean 42 billion tons of carbon dioxide. I mean, now that you're making me parse it out, it's 42 billion equivalents of carbon dioxide. Methane is 84x carbon dioxide. So one methane molecule contributes to global warming 84 times than one carbon dioxide molecule, right? So that's seen by a lot of people as, hey, let's go get this. It's like a, I guess, somewhat of a lower hanging fruit, I guess. But, and you would ask, where does methane get into the atmosphere? It's a lot of it is uncapped oil wells that are leaking, gas leakages in natural gas facilities around the world, and cow burps. And actually, weirdly enough, what's that? And manure. And in China and India, there are weirdly enough rice paddies. So there's the rice plant acts like a straw that goes into the place where the methanotropes are releasing methane and take out methane from the water. So all the rice paddies are huge polluters of methane. So it's, can we eat?
So is there anything to do about that? We can't tell Asia to stop eating rice.
Right.
Is
So,
there a low methane
but yeah, so we have a
strategy?
sort of what's called a rice microbiome company. This is another amazing innovator they thought about all the community of microbiomes inside the rice paddy and figured out a different microbiome replacement that would allow the yield to actually improve by 5% and the methane to be digested in enzymes right in the soil itself
So
and
it's
keep it
zero.
there. It's, well, it is not at scale, but it's starting to get to, it's promises to be zero, yeah, promises to be zero. So that's an interesting.
And will there be different varieties of rice, or is it only?
This wouldn't have to change the varieties of rice. That was the big key uptake, is that if we have innovations like this that change the rice, that people don't want it. Yeah. We haven't talked about plant-based food. We haven't talked about that contribution. We haven't talked about ag tech and increasing yields in sort of diminishing soil and arid soils and alkaline soils. That's another key part of climate resilience that we have to do. And Cynthia's here, time may be up.
Just before Cindy tells us we have to start, we do want your questions, but I want to tell you about one other bill
Yes.
that kind of croaked last week. It was a terrible thing. But the bill would have changed the words natural gas to methane throughout California's laws. Wow, amazing. It's a great idea. I was gonna be the expert witness in favor of that bill in a committee, but the chairman is terrible, and they ended up pulling the bill because the bill analysis that the committee wrote was so terrible, but we'll be back with that. But, the whole idea of natural gas, it sounds great. It's terrible, and that's why we all need to be swapping out our stoves and our furnaces for electrics. But I just thought a bill that was gonna make everybody who was gonna say methane instead of saying natural gas was just.
Before Cynthia calls us, maybe we'll.
Yeah.
So there's a symbolism. There's, for example, divesting from fossil fuels is a statement. Just like I remember, I was in the front lines of the apartheid divestment. Many of us were there at that time in the 80s. But it's a statement, and the statements only go so far, but it's very important, and it brings a lot of people into the movement. And so that may be where we leave it before we go to Q&A. Is I think that, as you can tell, there are many ways in which you can plug in to the change that needs to happen. And yeah, we have to plug in. We have to plug in. And I certainly believe that each one of us has to plug in order for the world to be a better place. Otherwise, that literally is going to be unlimited human suffering in the most innocent of people, the people who can't do it.
up for,
Trouble with that.
Yeah,
So I'll take this one.
I wanted to open up to Q&A for our audience, and we've been talking about action, 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 and Janet said to me at dinner, let's have a special interest group at AAUW, a climate action special interest group, so I'm starting a clipboard. And this is,
Pass it around.
Sign up.
yes,
Yeah.
this is exactly
Look,
how we
she's ready to sign
started
up.
our
She's ready to
plant-based
sign up.
lunch group, which I
Yeah.
will also plug. We have a plant-based lunch group that's meeting monthly now, and that started last year with a speaker program, and I wanted to share what I've learned about my plant-based journey. But I
Can
now,
I give one anecdote on this?
Mhm.
It came up over dinner and I wanted to be sure to mention it. Again, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, I was talking to a friend about internet companies. We like, tell me like, what are the good internet companies, you know? And he looked at me and said, what are you talking about? Every company is going to use the internet. Everybody's going to use it. Every company is going to be an internet company. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? And you know that's true. It's absolutely true. When you don't talk to somebody who uses the internet and say they're an internet company. Similarly, I believe that every company is going to be a climate company. Every organization like AAW is going to be a climate organization. I really believe that everything we do in the world is going to be like this. It's going to be the utility, it's going to be the language, it's going to be the thing that happens in the news headlines, it's the thing that we do. So just like the internet, I mean, we don't think anymore about going on the internet anymore, but that's what we do. We go and do that. That's part of our lives. In that way, I believe, that's my view of how climate's going to hit all of us and how we actually are going to participate, all of us. So it's classic. I think all of AAW should be a climate organization.
All right, thanks. So I wanted to open up to questions from the audience, so I can run the mic to you if you want to ask a question now.
Yes.
I can just be loud. I lived in New York for a while, so I can project. First of all, a couple of points. Natural gas, the greatest marketing con job of all time. Totally get that. One of the things, and then the other thing I wanted to say, I work at Stanford, I run sustainability, utilities and infrastructure, and we're working very, very hard on making sustainability into the business such that my goal is that the people who are working on sustainability now are the last generation of people who have sustainability in their title, because it just gets baked into everything. But one question I wanted to ask both of you, I come from an energy background, so I kind of geek out on that. And one of the things that I'm really concerned about is when we look at renewable energy, we look at energy storage, we look at a Tesla or another electric car, we're looking at something that is incredibly clean in operation. But the front end, the raw material extraction and processing, is frankly horrific. And the back end, the recycling, the disposal, also very, very troubling. And I wonder if we're in the same situation that we were with nuclear energy, where it was wonderful in operation, still is, but we have this waste problem that we've just been kicking down the road. Are we in a similar situation with solar panels and batteries and wind turbines and all that?
I'll take a shot at it. Yeah, one of the things that I think is going to happen is both transparency and measurement. And it's going to happen, for example, nowadays when you eat a food or something, there's a nutritional label in the back. It's law, you have to see it. But if I asked you, well, how much carbon is in your sweater? You wouldn't know it. Nobody knows it actually. So, and how much carbon is this building, this library, how much is it doing? We don't know it. So I think there's going to be, this thing that's going to happen. A lot of my companies are actually, this requires sensors, software, measurement systems of a very big scale. But when that happens, I believe that people like you, consumers, are going to hold the people responsible for the entire supply chain. You're right though, Right now, because I can't measure it, I can't hold people to account. So I think that is part of the solution and part of the future, is that we want to keep the whole supply chain. The other innovation that's happening is in these ends of the problem. So for example, I'll give you an example of another company that I don't mind talking about bacteria all the time, but anyway, this company mines lithium. Is very important for car batteries, and lithium is horrific. And so this company uses bacteria to mine and enrich lithium from the ore, so that we have to talk about that another time. But anyway, examples like that. And on the recycle side, I don't know if you, I went to a recycle plant recently. Humans are picking out the recycle and changing it. This is still the case in 2024. Here, the thing comes in a conveyor belt, and humans take it, right? There's no robotics, there's no automation, there's no, and so there is inventions of robotics. So my sense is that, oh, and by the way, recycling, my God, there's a big contribution. Okay, who knows the percentage of plastic that we recycle in this country? Can you take a wild guess? What? Wow, that's pretty close. I thought we could reach the place where it's 50 or 60. It is 6%. It's crazy, yeah.
Well, I think your point about EVs and solar panels, it's all good. It's all true. I do believe, as Mohan says, that there are folks who are working on it. Fortunately, both of those industries are new enough, so they're, we haven't reached the point where we have a giant glut of old EVs that need to be recycled. But I think we're gonna get there. But in the short term, if we can get off fossil fuels, we're moving towards solving the problem. It's not gonna be, it isn't like we make a decision to get better and everything moves smoothly along. There are gonna be corrections and changes and, oh no, we didn't think of that along the way, but I just think, we've gotta get going and we've gotta get off fossil fuels. So, sorry, we'll figure the rest of it out soon.
It's
I
a
think-
transition, it's not a switch, it's a transition.
I'm gonna actually limit us to one more question because the library actually closes at 8 o'clock. And I think you wanted to make a comment.
I had a question that your talk was very fascinating about legislation, be it on a city level, a state level, federal level, international level. I would like to know what I can do on a personal level. What can I go home and change?
You can sign up with us and we will give you something to do and people to do it with.
Okay.
Or if you don't have the time or the wherewithal, you can contribute money to a group like ours or another one that is doing the work. Because, whether you're directly involved or you're indirectly involved, you just have to know, everybody needs to do something, make a difference. I think that,
So they should get a QR code and boom, go there, sign up.
there's a QR code
volunteers.
on this side.
Yeah.
But you're saying that I need to work with a group.
I think
that
that's the
there is not
best.
an individual.
Well, you can write letters to the editor, but you might have better fodder to do that if you've got a group to work out the details with.
Okay.
What Climate Action California tries to do is put everybody to work, one way or another, depending on what you like to do. I could use a database person right now. I need a Zoom master. There are all sorts of, you don't have to be a policy wonk.
Okay.
But, I think it's better, and it's definitely more fun to work with other people than to be,
I was just hoping that there was something individually I could do
such as
with my
what?
home or my family or whatever.
You can be plant-based.
Well, you can certainly, you can swap out your gas stove and your furnace, which is,
Already all electric.
a lot of us have already done that, but, and you can talk other people into doing it too, but I think that those individual actions are not going to have the effect that policy change will have. So I say, work on policy.
Okay, thank you much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for coming.
We're gonna take it out to the outside.
Yeah.
You can go outside. I have to honor the library hours. Thank you very much for coming.